The question of the day, where are our flying cars? Are flying cars possible? Our next guest will explore that topic with us because he has been working on that for many years. Dr. Paul Moller is the president and chairman of the board of Moller International. He is a PhD engineer who has worked with many of the large aircraft companies out there, and he joins us now. Dr. Moller, thanks for coming on the show.
Yes, thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Now, is it true that you are working on a flying car now?
Yes, although I would choose to call it a little different than a flying car. That's obviously like the public. The public likes to see it because they got this image of, driving down the highway in a car and then taking off and flying. And I always say, well, what's the logic of driving down the highway if you can fly? The real thing you need is what's called a streetable aircraft, something you can drive from your home to a vertiport or a takeoff area, code in your destination, go to sleep, and be delivered someplace nearby or quite far away. That can only be accomplished with an aircraft that takes off vertically. Most of the flying cars that you read about are cars that convert to airplanes, then convert back to cars, but they require one-way. And that's what we've eliminated with the ability to rise vertically from your driveway.
So in the old cartoon days, the Jetsons or whatever, a flying car would have wings. I would assume that the vehicle you're working on, car, might be a convenient shorthand for personal vehicle, but it's really more of a vertical takeoff and landing aircraft for consumer use. Is that a fair way to describe it?
That's very accurate. The one thing it has is the ability to reduce the dimensions of a car, which is necessary if you're going to, go some distance on the street, but not think of it as a high-speed vehicle down the highway. Because if you try to do that, you're going to end up with a bad car and a bad airplane.
Well, now, Dr. Moller, in the way you described the trip that someone might take in this vehicle, you may have laid the foundation for the answer to my next question. But my biggest concern about personal flying vehicles, whatever you call them, flying cars or whatever, has been, well, of course, we need the technology, but I worry about people have enough time navigating cars in two dimensions, and I'm not really thrilled about the idea of the average person trying to, I flew ultralight aircraft myself. I don't love the idea of every suburban, couple having their own aircraft.
Well, you shouldn't, because that would not be practical. You really are going to be automated. Keep in mind that you have cars right now that are driverless. And if you can have a car running around the streets of San Francisco without a driver, you can understand the complexity that they have. They face, people stepping off the curbs, an environment that's at least an order of magnitude more complicated in the airspace. So think of the driverless car and then think of the pilot of this airplane. You get in this vehicle, it takes you somewhere. You cannot change the controls. You're absolutely right. You can't count on somebody deciding whether he's going to go left or right at 300 miles an hour, and the other person coming the other way might be going 300 miles an hour. It's just not even a remotely practical approach. So that's a clear need, of course, in this program.
Now, I am not an engineer, but just trying to think through this logically, the notion of this personal flying vehicle that is programmable, I actually wonder whether it wouldn't be an easier engineering solution to program your vehicle than to program a driverless car that has to worry about the kid running out between two parked vehicles or whatever. I actually wonder, you're an engineer, tell me, you're working on this, but I would think there might actually be slightly fewer variables in a flying vehicle than in a driverless car.
I would say an order of magnitude fewer. And as you know, we've been able to deliver cruise missiles down a smokestack 500 miles away and do it accurately. So the ability to control vehicles in the air remotely, we know that goes on every day with these cruise missiles or these drones in various countries. So that can be centrally controlled. We have virtual highways in the sky right now. They're just going to have to be expanded so that you have a much more of the private industry in the air as well as the commercial. And they're really in separate areas for the most part. The commercial industry is typically above 25,000 feet, and we would be typically below to 25,000 feet.
So what would you see? And we're talking with Dr. Paul Moller, the head of Moller International, about what might briefly be described as flying cars. What would you see as a logical ceiling for this vehicle? I remember from ultralights, you had to stay out of the flight path of commercial aviation and so on, had to stay lower. Where would you see, how high would you think of these things as flying on a day-to-day basis?
Well, there's three legal levels, and there's a number of practical levels. I'll speak to the legal levels first. We believe, based upon our discussions with the FAA, that we're going to be allowed to fly in the same region as the drones fly. That's 400 feet or less, almost immediately without a pilot's license. You'll have perhaps a pilot's certificate, which makes sure that you know the rules of the air, but you don't have to have any skill involved in it. Then there's the next level above that, which is right now it's called a light sports aviation. You're probably familiar with that one,
right?
Where you can fly to 8,500 feet, again without a pilot's license, with a pilot certificate. And then if you go above that, or you go more than 2 passengers, then you have to deal with having certification. So we're delaying that issue of certification as long as possible, because we believe if we've demonstrated the reliability of our vehicles for some time in the 2-passenger form, that we'll be able to bypass full certification for the 4- and 6-passenger vehicles. So
what do we do then? What do we think about backup systems? How could people feel confident that if the software or if the hardware, the controlling the navigation goes down, presumably your average consumer is not going to know what to do? What's the backup?
Well, you're asking all the right questions. We have 8 engines. Statistically, this allows us to fail an engine during hover, or fail more than one engine when we're flying forward. But more importantly, we have one complete independent flight control computer assigned to each engine, so we can use a computer and use these many computers and allow one to fail in hover, or more than one to fail going forward. And we have ultimately 2 parachutes, relatively small parachutes, as backups. We don't believe they'll be needed, but psychologically, I think when you start out, it's going to give people some sense of comfort that they have an ultimate protection.
Now, 8 engines, what's the gas mileage going to be like on something like that?
Well, these are small engines, not a lot bigger than, say, a bowling ball. Each engine produces a huge amount of power, and that's, of course, our contribution to this field more than anything else has been developing engines that are that powerful. But we get good, I would say, from an airplane point of view, a good fuel consumption if we assume that people rent a vehicle, and I really believe that they'll be renting these rather than buying these for the most part. If they rent a vehicle consistent with their goal, 1 passenger for a business trip, 2 for a couple, and a vehicle carrying more people for a large amount, you'd be using it at full capacity all the time. And our goal is, and we're very close to it right now, is 100 passenger miles per gallon. And it turns out the average car only carries 1.3 people, and if you put that together with a 25 miles a gallon, you get 40 miles a gallon the average, or 40 miles per passenger mile. We would be double that.
Interesting. And what about noise? We're talking with Dr. Paul Moller about a flying personal vehicle, consumer vehicle. What about noise? 8 engines, fairly low altitude. Are these things quiet?
Well, you're hitting all the right points. I can tell you the engine issue or noise issue is a very big one. We have developed in our engine, we've developed a particular form of engines which is called a compound version, which means it goes through a double expansion cycle, meaning that the gases exit the engine at almost atmospheric. And when this engine is running, even without a muffler, it is still quiet. The fan, however, is something you have to deal with very actively. The fan noise is not something that's just going to go away automatically. So what we do with fan noise, we generate what's called mutual noise cancellation. We generate a frequency equal to the fan frequency, and then we phase shift it, meaning we just shift it over. So you can see how a sine wave shifted would cancel out the noise wave. And this is used today in a lot of situations, and we would have to have that to get the noise level down to that of a quiet automobile.
Now, let me ask you this question, Dr. Moller. Those of us who have been around a few years have heard. I can remember reading Popular Mechanics decades ago about the advent of the flying car. Why is this time and your work different from what we've heard about in the past?
Well, I mentioned earlier our major contribution is developing an engine that is so powerful and small, because one of the problems in taking off vertically is you're trying to imitate the hummingbird. Now, a hummingbird, if you know the hummingbird can eat its own weight per day in food. It has bones that are hollow to lighten its weight. It has a brain, computer brain that's been evolving for probably a few 100 million years. So it's got a great head start on us. We are today, though, with materials like carbon fiber. We have these computers now that are incredibly cheap because this drone industry has made them available at almost no cost. So what's missing, and the major thing missing, has been the engine. And we've spent the last 40 years, I brought the first engine of this type from Europe 40 years ago, and we spent close to $100 million on this engine. We have an engine right now that makes this vehicle possible. So that's really your answer, is that without this engine, there is no Sky Car or New Era. The engine, I think, was invented for this vehicle. I would hope that's the case.
Well, so my last question for you, Dr. Paul Moller, is when can I take my first ride in it?
Well, we're going to have the New Era 200, which is the one that looks like a Jetson vehicle. It's not that high a speed. Its top speed is about 100 miles an hour, but we wouldn't necessarily say you'd be burning a lot of fuel. It's more like 75 miles an hour. That'll be on the market next year. It's fully tooled. We're doing the production version right now, and it'll be flying in the next 90 days. It's flown many times in the past, but not as a production vehicle. Next year, the year after next year, we'll have the two-passenger Sky Car out. And if things go right, the four-passenger would follow either the following year or the year after that.
Well, I hope you'll let me know when I can come ride in a prototype, because I will come out. You're in Davis, California, I understand. I will come out there and do it.
Well, I look forward to that. And you might tell your listeners, if they want to know a lot more about our company, just put Sky Car on their website, or on the Internet, and they'll go to 400,000 articles, much more than they will want to read. But it'll lead them to our website, and they can learn that we're a public company. And with our flight or our vehicle in the next few months, you can expect our stock to go up to a great degree.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for coming on the program, Dr. Paul Moller, President and CEO of Moller International. Enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you very much.
I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and we will be right back after this on the Zero Hour.